will serve the jungle dragon. We serve no one.
Alright, okay, welcome everybody to another video. Today, we're going to do a little bit of an analysis on this official launch trailer for Heart of Thorns. There's an awful lot we can talk about with this one. I haven't done this since... oh gosh, it must have been back in February or so when they did the original announcement trailer. And it's actually funny to me because in some ways I think those original trailers they did may have been better for advertising Heart of Thorns than this one. But they did something very special here. Something I've actually been markedly saying I'm an advocate for a while, and so I certainly can't complain about that fact. They went back to a more CGI style. In fact, what they seem to have done is gone with like a 50-50 blend of their painterly artistic style that almost in some ways looks kind of like in-engine stuff, combined with, you know, really intricate, detailed CGI work, such as what you just saw with the Mordrim champion being formed and all these fantastic-looking vines crawling through his skin. So, for those of you kind of new to the franchise who don't know where to kind of place this with the way ArenaNet works, back when the game Prophecies, the franchise itself was born, they did do a CGI trailer. It had clearly been, like, outsourced to some other company, and they had some vague stuff to work with, but the CGI trailer for the original Prophecies release had nothing to do with the story, and so while it looked pretty and probably sold them a lot of copies, it didn't mean anything, neither for the mechanics of the game, neither for showing the game off, nor for the plot itself, right? Except just, you know, seeing some of our favorite characters in CGI in weird places. So that was what they did for Prophecies. Then they did Factions. Factions was the height of their release trailers, in my opinion, and continues to be to this day, even after the Heart of Thorns release trailer. And why? Well, because when they did CGI for that trailer, it was long, established many of those large story beats that were so essential for the narrative and setting up the area, like the Jade Wind, that just looked incredible on screen. But everything about that trailer was super relevant for the lore, and I think they got it bang on. By the time Nightfall came around, just 6 months later, they didn't have time to do a trailer like that. Maybe didn't even have the funding, because Nightfall didn't sell that well compared to the other two. And we kind of lost CGI trailers from then on. The Nightfall trailer was barely a shred of a trailer in comparison to the Factions one before it. And of course, those of you all know how Guild Wars 2's been going, from them doing in-engine stuff to then the very concept arty Easter egg trailer we saw at the announcement of this expansion. So they've gone back to CGI. It is obviously bang on point with the story, but how much does it really show? Not too much. It shows a few of our favorite characters somewhere in the jungle. Presumably this is just not a real tangible moment in the narrative. It more, to me, feels like a theoretical floating moment that just kind of depicts the general feel of the expansion, that is, heroes fighting a dragon. And for that reason, there's not too much to discern, but I do want to go into a few things. Number one, let's have a look at the central focus on Ritlock. Now, Ritlock wasn't the only allied character we saw. We did see other members of Destiny's Edge 2.0 on there as well. But what you got to think about is this is the launch trailer, and there are a lot of big characters here. Ritlock is Destiny's Edge. What about all of his other friends? What's going on with them? There was already a lot of focus on Ritlock as it stood with some of the earlier trailers with him coming out of the mist with what we saw in the betas. So it really seems like ArenaNet are honing in on this guy. I've seen some potential worries from people, and maybe these aren't totally unfounded, that Ritlock is basically the new Traherne. We in this community, we're so fast to say, who's the new Traherne? Who's the new Traherne? And because Ritlock kind of takes center stage in this trailer, rather than us, the player character, then of course that means he's going to steal the show, right? Well, first, I'd say it's pretty ridiculous to try and judge the trailer based on something like that. It's a trailer. What, you want an individual tailored one with your player character in each one? Obviously, someone has to take center stage. Either that, or they leave the focus on the entire group. But definitely, Ritlock was getting the focus here. And what I find more interesting is that there are a lot of other characters that weren't shown. If Ritlock's there, don't the other members of Destiny's Edge deserve to be in the background somewhere? Kind of suggests something more interesting is happening with them. Air dying, of course, has been a big theory for us for a long time. But then why wouldn't you show Zoja? Why wouldn't you show Logan? We've had some interviews with voice actors over TwitchCon. Why wouldn't these characters have any prominence at all in the trailer? Of course, Traherne's the other big missing face, but, you know, I think we may have a very legitimate reason to believe why he's not there, and that could have something to do with his corruption. Funnily enough, though, the discussion doesn't end there when it comes to missing characters. Look back at Destiny's Edge 2.0. There's 2 faces missing there, guys. The most important of those 2 being Rox. Look, it's Casimir, Bram, Timey, and Marjorie. No Rox at all. Instead, Ritlock. Ritlock's kind of taking the Char face. And you can't make the argument that they did this because they didn't want 2 Char because they wanted one of each of the races, because there's no Sylvari representation in this trailer whatsoever. Also curious, considering that this is so heavily focused on Sylvari, and we have 2 humans. So where's Rox? Does that mean something special is happening to Rox in the story? And what does that mean for Kanak too? I mean, are we supposed to be considering Kanak Destiny's Edge 2.0 thoroughly now? Or is it going to be more of a natural story, which is what I'd hope for, where we stop kind of banding these people up together, and the characters are just working on their own and doing what would come naturally to those characters. The specific lack of detail on, like, those characters, to me, then shifts the trailer perhaps as being less a way of a theoretical thing that won't actually happen into the story, as maybe this is a guaranteed thing that will happen in the story. And the reason some of these characters don't appear here is because this isn't just used for the purposes of being a trailer. They've literally taken some moment that will happen in game. The other characters will be preoccupied at this moment in the game, and this group plus us will see Morgemoth or, you know, experience these events. So that's kind of an interesting thought. And I've seen some discussion too, and honestly I'm inclined to lean this way myself, that this didn't really feel very much like a trailer, but rather it felt more like a random cutscene that had been pulled out the game. Now, obviously, we're not going to get cutscenes of this quality in Heart of Thorns. We might towards the end. What you guys have to remember is, yes, Guild Wars 2's personal story was primarily told through side-by-side flashes of characters, as well as, like, fixed camera movements through in-engine stuff. But there were a couple of very special moments, namely when you joined an order, when you created your character and you got the first cutscene, when you started the final dungeon, when you started the first dungeon, where they gave us these elaborate kind of concept arty scenes. And I wonder whether this kind of CGI blend approach that they've got given us in the launch trailer could actually just be a cutscene. I mean, I got some serious vibes here of just feeling like I was in the middle of a story mission and then this just sort of showed up at the end of the mission, and this really could have served that purpose of being an in-game cutscene. So we'll see what all of that potentially means. Maybe it comes down to something as basic as, oh, they didn't have time to render and produce all the little details of all of these other characters. You know, that would have been too difficult for them. Because they did a pretty marvelous job. At least we don't see too much of Destiny's Edge 2.0. But Ritlock, I thought this was fantastic. Seeing a different rendering of this character, you know. It was always interesting for me when Guild Wars 2 came out, because I'd already read Edge of Destiny, the novel, and you get a very clear idea of what this Char looks like. You know, the Char as well themselves just in general look very different in Guild Wars 1, and then they're kind of modeled and rendered a different way in Guild Wars 2, and you kind of get used to what Ritlock looks like. And now in this one with so much more detail on his fur and the way he moves. The funny thing is that, as I said, the Prophecies CGI trailer, which was the only trailer we had for, like, mainland Tyria stuff, though Prophecies had a lot of plot to do with Ascalon, it never depicted a Char for us. So we've never seen one of these really beautifully realized Char at all until now, and I think he does fantastic. His Revenant armor is really shining on there. Some people have focused on the fact that Ritlock can turn on and off Sahothin. For some reason, this rings a bell to me. I don't actually think this is new information. I think it's kind of been a toggleable thing for a while. It's funny, having a bit of focus on Sahothin in the cutscene was one of those moments where I really felt like I appreciated the fact I knew the story. It was one of these things, I'm hoping that people who don't know much about the Heart of Thorns story or the Guild Wars story, they'll, like, watch this cutscene, they'll be like, yeah, that's sort of supposed to be kind of badass, right? And they'll think about that and they'll focus on that, and maybe that'll be a bit of motivation for people to go, you know, go back, play through the story again and get ready for when Heart of Thorns comes out. I really like that little bit of focus there. So let's move away from kind of the Ritlock side stuff. Let's look at some other things too. Let's look at Morgemoth, the design of this character. Are we seeing Morgemoth is the first question. So here's the setup of the trailer. We sort of see a lot of roots, a lot of things closing around. There is a root on a rock that kind of looks like it would be his hand or his claw or a talon or something, and it breaks the rock, okay? And they actually, before this trailer came out, tweeted to us, showing us this, and everyone was like, whoa, that must be his foot. I actually think, having seen the cutscene now, or the trailer, having seen it now, this certainly doesn't seem to me like, you know, a physical dimension of the dragon. It just seems like a root, and it's kind of crushing this rock to show Morgemoth's grasp and his anger. And really, that's what this whole thing seems to set up, which is pretty considerable, that it's kind of given us this idea that Morgemoth isn't just the centralized dragon-looking thing that presumably is a part of the structure of roots, but that he is all of the roots. I mean, look at the actual dialogue itself. The first thing we hear is, "I am this world." A line which itself you could dive really far into and think about, you know, the way that he is perhaps made of the magic he consumes, and the world is nothing without its magic. The previous races knew this in the last Elder Dragon Rising. That's why they fought so hard to protect it inside the Bloodstone. And so the idea here is that Morgemoth is everywhere, and all these vines that you've been seeing, even as we've been running around in the Silver Waste, that literally is Morgemoth. This isn't something without precedent either. Season 2 of The Living World really touched on this kind of thing, with the idea that all these vines coming out and attacking the waypoints were Morgemoth himself. Even the Pale Tree has some story about how her roots go deep into the earth, and she is all of it. You know, the avatar of the Pale Tree is just a representation of all of that, and it's all connected, potentially, you know, right back into Morgemoth himself. That mentioned the Bloodstones, by the way. I can't help but smile now thinking about the lore. When you look at the Bloodstone in Guild Wars 1, it talks about how the jungle foliage, presumably Morgemoth, right, or related to Morgemoth, it cannot affect the Bloodstone. It cannot go anywhere near it. And so this is what's really fun about CGI trailers like this, and trailers that really well depict theatrically the kind of reach and power that this dragon wields. Is, you know, we've got this whole cutscene showing his vines everywhere, consuming everything, destroying these rocks. And then I can't help but just think back to the Bloodstone, and it's just this rock that's out there the Morgemoth can't touch, and he can't get to, and his vines can't climb over it. That's a pretty exciting thought. So we mentioned a little bit there the dialogue. So the trailer does start with the line, "I am this world." What else do we get non-diegetically like this through the trailer? There's straight away a discussion, is the dragon actually talking? Now, I saw a fairly interesting back and forth on this. Are these lines that we're hearing actually the dragon physically opening his mouth? Now, that's not really animated in the trailer. All the time when he's speaking, obviously, we don't even see him, so you couldn't tell whether he's actually saying it, or is it more of a telepathic thing? They set up the idea of the dragons being able to talk telepathically a long while ago. So there was significant focus on it in Season 2 of The Living World, where it was actually mentioned by Air that Glint couldn't talk. She just communicated to everyone through telepathy. So there's a bit of a discrepancy here. This is another example of the new writing team messing up and not quite getting the lore right. We saw in Guild Wars 1, she physically spoke, right? We saw that.
The moment has finally come. You are the chosen I have been waiting for.
Well, we even saw in the book Edge of Destiny that she physically spoke as well. And now they're kind of telling us, right, well, it's not that. It's through his mind. So what are we expecting Morgemoth to do? We know he communicates this way to the Sylvari, but what about Ritlock in this trailer, right? When he looks up at this thing that is representing Morgemoth, at least whether it is him or not, we'll talk about in a second, is this thing physically speaking to him, or is it all telepathy? And if it's all telepathy, why is he currently only communicating to the Sylvari through this means, not the rest of the characters? Leo Hoyer was talking about in one of the other Twitch streams how Morgemoth can corrupt anything. It's not just the Sylvari, it's just he's got kind of this greater connection to them and can continuously be in their mind, it would seem. But we'll discuss that more in another video as I go over a whole ton of the other TwitchCon stuff. So what do we believe about the dialogue? I am inclined to believe, despite the fact that in Guild Wars 1 we saw Glint talk, despite the fact that in the books we've seen it, you probably want to pay attention to what the devs have said most recently, as that's probably their setups. You know, it's more likely to affect the story going forward than clinging on needlessly to old things you liked about the last game. Alright, so the dialogue itself though, I am this world. Great line that I very much enjoyed. And it seems like right now he's talking directly to the Sylvari because he says, you are a part of me and it's time to come home. But there is kind of a double meaning there. If we kind of just look at all the races as inhabitants of the planet, and he is the planet, and we all consume the magic just as he consumes magic, then yeah, we're all a part of the same system, right? And it kind of affects all of us. It's time to come home. where is home? Is there a suggestion here that being corrupted by an Elder Dragon means more than just having your body used and deteriorated? Does it mean that the Elder Dragons are taking your soul or your essence elsewhere? Well, actually, I don't think that could be true, because when it comes to the Risen, at the very least, there were a few instances, at least one instance, where you interact with some people's souls and you find out that the bodies have been taken by Zaitan, and you go off to deal with those Risen. So that's interesting. And then you get like the second batch of lines. You get the Mordrum champion who says, "All will serve the jungle dragon." Ritlock responds, "We serve no one." And then the trailer ends with Morgemoth again, presumably saying, "Who dares stand against me after the Wyvern's been destroyed?" And actually, if you listen very carefully, a lot of people might miss this, but Morgemoth laughs. Alright, so to look at these. First, the line, "All will serve the jungle dragon." I find it interesting. I've not done a discussion on this on the channel just yet, but what they did at launch with Zaitan is they just used the term dragon. Dragon will consume you, or Zaitan, right? And they kind of did this, I think, to try and set up the idea that we weren't thinking about the other dragons, and then that made the story in the moment more epic, because it's like, it's us versus the dragon, nothing else matters. I find it interesting that now with Heart of Thorns, they're kind of having to use the word jungle dragon. Jungle slips in there every time, because they have to, like, make that distinction. They kind of lose that little thing. The response from Ritlock, really this whole thing, "We serve no one," is cheesy. I'm not a huge fan of it, but at the end of the day, it's a trailer, right? Well, what are we expecting? Some really long, interesting discourse where Ritlock's character truly shines and Morgemoth's character truly shines, and we really get it super invested in it? No, that's not going to be what they will have done for the trailer. So I think, you know, in terms of exciting people and kids and totally new faces to the franchise, it's acceptable, but it is cheesy, and ArenaNet have always kind of leaned in that direction, and I can understand some of people's frustrations towards that. And then we get the really cool bit at the end. I liked the line, "Who dares stand against me?" Why? Because it didn't sound as cheesy as you might first have taken it. Because at face value, again, it's another cheesy line. But to me, this more seemed like genuine curiosity. And curiosity shows that there are things Morgemoth himself wants to learn. It makes him much more of a character. Just because he can speak doesn't necessarily give him the character that he needs. The fact that he's asking questions, that there is the potential for Morgemoth to not know something, that he is not just this ultimate big bad guy, Mary Sue of the bad guy world, right, that can do everything, that he is curious, that he is genuinely wondering, who the hell just one-shot this Wyvern I was fighting? That makes Morgemoth really interesting, and they cap that off with laughter afterwards. So it could be genuine curiosity, or it could be malice, and the laughter comes through and maybe shines a greater light on that. And you know, that too kind of plays into the same idea that he is more nuanced than we saw Zaitan was, for example. That is wonderful. Super happy about that towards the end, and really looking forward to kicking his ass based on that, basically. Alright, so since we're talking about the guy himself, let's go back to the idea of the design. Now, is he all the roots that rule the world? Is this thing that we're seeing not actually Morgemoth, but just some kind of, you know, mass of roots which he is controlling and manipulating in this moment? Should we cut this down? He can just appear anywhere else. But basically, the idea would be, as long as there are roots somewhere, Morgemoth can manifest himself as those roots, and he's finding, you know, kind of a little bit like this hive mind idea. Or is there an actual dragon out there somewhere? So I don't think many of us are expecting a super Western-looking dragon. As soon as the trailer came out, I threw out this tweet, which kind of showed this mock-up I did, where what we actually see in the cutscene of this thing that could be Morgemoth does look quite similar, at least in its stance. It does look pretty similar to the earliest concept art we saw of Morgemoth. This concept art that you're seeing here predates even their announcement or reveal that he existed. I used this concept art years ago when I was speculating about the existence of the Sixth Elder Dragon, because it had been done, you know, it was just called, I think, Plant Dragon or something. And it looks like they are drawing from that. Somebody did respond with another image, this one here, which again seems to be kind of fitting and in keeping with Morgemoth. But is this the dragon himself? If we zoomed out a bit more on the trailer here, would we see, you know, some elaborate wings back there? Maybe. I don't see why we couldn't. But the question is, if we kill this, does that mean Morgemoth is dead? Well, I think probably not. And what we might want to focus on from this point forwards is the actual title of the expansion, the Heart of Thorns. It's kind of setting up the idea that there is some central point that we have to strike, and it's at that very central point that we will finally be able to destroy Morgemoth. And what is that? Well, that's probably what we, the characters, are going to be asking ourselves as we play through the actual story. So there you go, guys. That's my analysis of the trailer. I did very much enjoy it as a fan. You know, it's more content, it's more cool-looking stuff, and it's a new kind of style of cinematic that we've seen. But, you know, I won't lie to you. I was saying a lot before this came out when I was speculating what the trailer could be. What I really wanted to see for, like, selling copies of the game, not as a fan, I really enjoyed this, but for selling copies of the game, I wonder how they would have done if they'd gone the other route and they'd gone for some kind of crazy montage-style trailer that showed off all the dozens of new features that Heart of Thorns will have, kind of like a huge sum up of all the other individual trailers they've done, all the other individual features and information releases they've done over this entire year. They kind of threw that all into one trailer, and it was a lot of in-engine stuff, and you know, it was edited together in a really nice way with some awesome epic music in the background. I wonder whether that would have done better, because this, to me, didn't show very much. You know, if I was a totally average person just looking in at the franchise from the outside, I don't know how well this would do. It was kind of short. It felt like I was just sort of watching a random cutscene in the game and didn't tell me anything about Heart of Thorns. Did they go with the right angle there? Well, maybe that's up for you guys to discuss in the comments. Thanks very much for watching. I am totally swamped. I apologize that this video came out late, but there'll be lots more TwitchCon coverage coming up very soon. Thanks, guys. Have a great day, and I'll see you later.